no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the Briefing PM. I'm Alastair Stewart, and here's what's coming up over the next hour. The typical household energy bill is to rise to an average of £3,549, coming amid a cost of living crisis, with prices soaring and taxes and interest rates going up. I'll be discussing this with GB News business and economics editor Liam Halligan, and also Derek Licorice from Utilita Energy. And GB News has undertaken a people's poll, a proper poll, not just people who watch GB News, a proper sample. And we asked those people who they'd vote for if a general election happened tomorrow and who they would prefer to be the Prime Minister. I'll be discussing all of that with polling analyst David Cowling, and some of you will want to sit down and put a cool hat on. Prime Minister made a surprise visit to Kyiv this week in what will likely be his last official visit as Prime Minister, where, of course, he remains extremely popular. We'll be discussing his legacy with Major General Chip Chapman, and we'll also discuss Zelensky's comments that the world narrowly avoided a nuclear disaster. Give me your political briefings. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me, or indeed you can tweet at GBNews.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past midday. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Energy bills are set to rise by more than 80%, hitting households already struggling through the cost of living crisis. Ofgem has announced the price cap will increase from just under £2,000 to over £3,500 in October. The Chancellor, Nadine Zahawi, acknowledges the rise will cause stress for many, but says government help is coming.
Clearly, there's real anxiety amongst the population, both in terms of people's household energy, gas and electricity, but also businesses. I've been working up options. The moment I walked into this building on the 5th of July, I tasked the team with two things. One, let's get this £37 billion out of the door, so if you're a pensioner, you get another £300. The next tranche of the £650 for the most vulnerable households, the 8 million households, is also going out.
Ofgem says the incoming Prime Minister must do more to tackle the impact of price rises. Conservative leadership candidate Rishi Sunak says he has a plan.
I've consistently said that the cost of living is the biggest challenge facing the country. Today's figures illustrate the scale of that challenge. Now, as Chancellor, I announced significant support to help people, but the situation has deteriorated, and as Prime Minister, I would go further. My priority is to support the most vulnerable in our society and pensioners. That's why, on top of cutting VAT off energy bills for everybody, I would provide further direct financial assistance to those groups of people, and I want them to have certainty that that help is coming.
Meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says more focus needs to be on the energy companies and what they can do to alleviate the pain.
We need to have a freeze on those energy prices. Do not let them go up to those levels, and pay for that in part by a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies on those excess profits. Meanwhile, you've got a government that is missing in action, and I think most people looking in today would say that is unforgivable from the government in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
While those already tightening their belts fear there's worse to come.
You know, I'm lucky enough that this next price cap rise might not mean we can't buy food, but it's a pattern that means that things become more difficult for us, and maybe if it happens again, we're in trouble.
It is hard, and the only solution I've got at the moment is possibly moving in one of my kids, their wife and two of my grandchildren, so I can make ends meet.
There's definitely been a massive increase in the supermarkets. I mean, I shop in there, in some even in the budget supermarkets like Lidl's, Aldi. The prices have changed dramatically in the sort of like the last sort of 3 to 6 months.
What I'm definitely doing is you spend on what's important. What you don't need to do, you don't do it, and try and budget as much as possible.
A 36-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. The 9-year-old was shot in her home on Monday night after a gunman chased another man into her home in the Dovecot area of the city. Liverpool legend Ian Rush and ex-Everton player Ian Snowden left flowers on behalf of the Merseyside football clubs earlier. Police say the suspect, who's from Huyton, was arrested during an operation involving armed officers. The number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats this year has passed 24,000. Ministry of Defence figures show more than 800 migrants crossed in 16 small boats yesterday, the second busiest day of the year so far. That as the cost of the UK's asylum system topped £2 billion a year for the first time, following the highest number of claims in 2 decades. A GB News People's poll has found the majority of Brits prefer a Labour government with Sir Keir Starmer at the helm rather than a Conservative one under Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. The survey shows Labour holds a 14% lead over the Tories. The findings conducted by People Polling also reveals the word that comes to mind the most about Tory leadership frontrunner Liz Truss is untrustworthy. Professor of Politics at the University of Kent, Matthew Goodwin, says it could mean the Conservatives have less support at the next general election.
There is a risk here, clearly in these numbers, that if things don't change, the Conservatives are looking at a sort of 1997-2001 scenario where they not only lose that all-important red wall in northern England, but they also lose a large chunk of that blue wall across the south.
More than 100,000 Royal Mail workers have walked off the job in a dispute over pay. It's the first of 4 days of industrial action, with strikes also taking place on the 31st, as well as next month on the 8th and 9th. The Communication Workers Union says it's the biggest strike in the UK since 2009. It's demanding a pay rise that more closely reflects the current rate of inflation. Royal Mail has warned letters won't be delivered and some parcels will be delayed. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to the briefing with Alistair.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. Hello and welcome to the briefing with me, Alistair Stewart. Now, the surge in global energy prices, prompted not least by 6 months of war in Ukraine, has prompted a cost of living crisis, doomed efforts to buck markets, and a fundamental political clash between free marketeers and those who say state control and nationalisation are the only ways forward. Now, for most of us, the headline is what we'll be paying come October. But before that, early in September, the Tories will have a new leader and we'll all have a new Prime Minister. Only then will we know the full extent of what he or she plans to do to ease our pain. And we're fully aware here at GB News that it's real pain. Short of breaking the bank or planting an Amazon-sized rainforest of money trees, however, it won't be enough. A sticking plaster at best on what is a gaping wound. The supply side is the only answer, and at best, our own supplies. But when Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak both say that they support fracking, but only if the locals support it, we are looking at a crisis in leadership. Localism and energy security aren't good bedfellows at a time of crisis. Labour wanted to freeze the cap, and at least one of the energy suppliers and distributors said that they would be very happy to oblige at a price of £100 billion over 2 years. I'll bet that caused laughter in Moscow and in Riyadh. So, today we're going to look if there are any real alternatives out there or on offer from the Tory contestants. We'll also be looking at an exclusive GB News poll that you heard about in Rhiannon's news there, which will not make happy reading for either of those contestants. It finds that most would now rather have Sir Keir Starmer at number 10 than either Truss or Sunak. You're watching the briefing. Do let us know what you think. I'm with you until 1 o'clock, and then my good friend Liam Halligan will take over with On the Money. So sobering news, if sobering news was needed this morning, as the country awoke to a new energy price cap. Ofgem announced the energy price cap will increase from the current 1,971 to 3,549 from the 1st of October. The industry regulators told households to brace for those higher bills this autumn and winter, while imploring the next Prime Minister to take urgent action. Well, the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nadhim Zahawi, spoke to reporters earlier today.
Clearly, there's real anxiety amongst the population, both in terms of people's household energy, gas and electricity, but also businesses, especially SMEs, which I am also focusing on. The help we're putting in at the moment, the 37 billion, we are part of the way through. So the help coming in from October onwards, if everybody's bill will get £400 off that, in terms of the additional increase now, sort of deals with about half of it. But we know that's not enough. We've got to do more. I've been working up options. The moment I walked into this building on the 5th of July, I tasked the team with two things. One, let's get this 37 billion out of the door. So if you're a pensioner, you get another £300. The next tranche of the £650 for the most vulnerable households, the 8 million households, is also going out. But the second thing I said was, we know, and I knew then, that Putin will continue to use energy as a weapon, as a way of getting back at us for the help we're putting into Ukraine. We need to remain resilient. We need to make sure that this isn't a sticking plaster, that for the long term we continue to help the most vulnerable who have no cushion, and that's what I'm determined to do, and we're working up those options for both households and for business for the incoming Prime Minister on the 5th of September to take those decisions. So my message today is, we'll get this 37 billion to people's, to help them for now, and then more will be coming because we know this will continue in January and, of course, on to April and next year. And we have to remain resilient, because the message I want to be able to send to Mr. Putin, that the nation wants to send, is this will not work. We will continue to face you down. We'll continue to help Ukraine because you have illegally invaded a free and democratic country.
Well, listening to that, with me here in the studio is GB News' busiest bunny today, our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. We were talking before we came in. Let's be crystal clear from the outset. We are not here to frighten the horses. We are here to try and help. But there are some unpalatable truths out there. The state cannot and will not bail out everyone.
There will be pain. We're shocked by these numbers, Alistair, but neither you or I are surprised, because in our journalism, we've been keeping a close eye on wholesale prices, and anyone who's paying attention could have predicted that the Ofgem energy price cap would rise to about £3,500, given where wholesale gas prices have been. They're 3 times up on the start of the year. They're 10 times up on this time last year. Of course we knew it was going to be this high. The government did not have to wait until now or weeks in the future to come up with a support package to try and help people deal with the angst and anguish that many will be feeling now.
To be fair, and again, we believe passionately in that as well, there are hundreds of billions coming along from Rishi Sunak from the days when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. Nadhim, very flat bat there.
Yep.
The offer of a price freeze, I mean, I'm on record. I know it's Labour policy, but it strikes me as being the economics and politics of the playground. It's a nonsense. But Scottish and Southern Electric made it crystal clear. Yeah, you can freeze the cap, freeze the price, at a cost of £100 billion over 2 years, more than defence and education.
That's right. So the money that Rishi Sunak announced was, in the spring, before we knew energy prices were going to go this high. And of course, in recent weeks, the Kremlin's really turned the screw by closing the gas off to Germany for maintenance reasons, not for 3 days. That's completely spooked markets. So we know there's a £400 rebate for everyone on their energy bills. We know there's an extra £650 a year if you qualify for certain benefits, and that includes pension credit. But that's not going to touch the sides for a lot of people, and there will be an additional support package announced. We should say that. The government gets it. People like you and I are talking to ministers, special advisors all the time. We're telling them what we know. That's part of what good journalism is, right? This conversation between broadcasters, newspaper people and ministers and officials. It strikes me, though, that it should have happened earlier. But put that to one side. A price cap, you can, just say we're not going to pass these prices on to consumers, but someone has to pay because the wholesale gas costs money.
Those wholesale prices that you so brilliantly described, whether it be in the Middle East or whether it be in Russia, they're going to carry on going up, whatever the retail market in the UK does.
Not even the nice Norwegians are going to give us gas on the cheap. By the way, that is an idea that's been discussed among diplomats, but that's not going to happen. So someone has to pay what is in the middle between where the prices we want consumers to pay and the price of the gas that's being used to generate the electricity that we all need. Now, you can either try and give money to households so they pay to help them pay the elevated prices. It's so hard to direct that money, though, Alistair. If you give it to all households, you're helping the rich. If you only give it to poorer households, what about those who are just about managing that aren't on benefits? They're always very, very tough choices. Or you can give the money to the electricity retailers. They take the hit and then they charge customers more going forward. If you do that, you're bailing out the fat cats.
Well, and SSE talked about a 20-year cycle.
That's right. And also, if you do that, you then have to get really into the weeds of private companies' accounts for years in the future.
Sure. I want to take you to the flip side of that coin. We both studied economics, and it's a dismal science, it may be, but it's a science we both love. The other side of that coin is the supply side.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart to hear people like Liz and Rishi Sunak vying to be Prime Minister who say, let's do fracking. There's a huge appetite for fracking. We know that there's massive UK energy there to be had. But the injection of localism means if you don't want it where you live and I don't want it where I live, it won't happen. You can't be like that in an energy crisis.
And also, it's worth saying, on my On the Money show, we often discuss fracking. We often discuss... We've been fixated on energy literally since last September when the show began. Fracking isn't going to help anyone anytime soon. It's not going to help anyone this winter. What can help people this winter is more North Sea oil and gas coming on stream by incentivising those companies. And that's why, because the downstream, the upstream energy companies, those that actually get the oil and gas on the ground, they are making huge profits because their extraction costs are roughly the same and the price they're getting
but ironically,
is much
also...
But then we put a windfall tax on them, and then they're going to say, well, we can't produce more energy.
But the wholesale markets would think, hang on a minute, UK is going to have fracking gas coming on stream in 18 months, 12 months' time. No, maybe not.
It takes long, potentially, but these things take a long time.
We've got to be real.
And you're right, Alistair, if we use a crisis to ram through something against sort of democratic norms, then that won't do anything to help the fracking industry in the long term. It will just make the country dig its heels in.
Sure. Final question, and you've got about a minute to do it, which you'll hate me for. Is
hesitation, repetition, or deviation.
I implied in my lead-in that I smell a fundamental economic debate building up here in the run-up to the election.
Big time.
It is the old free marketeers who praise Thatcher versus, to be honest, Labour sniffing around Corbyn policy again. State control, straight direction, nationalisation.
It's really interesting because you've got the SNP north of the border pushing for nationalisation. The Labour Party are treading carefully because they feel nationalisation may frighten the horses. But, Keir Starmer wants to take the Labour Party in a more Blairite direction because he thinks... he's got a point that is where elections are won or lost in the centre ground of British politics. That's in normal times, Alistair, but these ain't normal times. It's feeling more and more like the 70s when I was a lad, when you were a seasoned young journalist, you were an industrial correspondent. I remember watching you on the TV during that period. I think we're getting into that economics of hard choices, the rubber hitting the road, the brass tacks. People are going to be talking about renationalisation and energy price caps, but we must always keep in mind that an energy price cap will cost us hundreds of billions of pounds.
It's always a pleasure to see you. and go and have a coffee and a walk round the block because you're back on at 1. Liam Halligan there, being brilliant as always. He'll be brilliant again at 1 o'clock here on GB News with his own programme On the Money. Thanks for breaking into your morning to be with us. Let's now bring in Derek Lickrish, who is from Utilita Energy, which is one of the distributing companies. Derek, really, really good to see you. I hope you heard the conversation that Liam and I were just having. What are those suppliers, the big generators, actually saying to you? Grin and bear it?
There's no doubt that it's hard to know exactly what they're saying to us, because you talk about us being a distributor. We're an energy retailer, and I think it's important to make that clear. I also want to make clear that in terms of the price cap, it is about the average bill and not about people who use more than average. So you need to be careful about that. But there is no doubt there is a lot of money being made upstream where there's oil being taken out of the ground, gas taken out of the ground, and in terms of generation. Now, but a point I would like to challenge you on, and you say that people are laughing about the £100 billion cost that's being proposed to freeze prices. Back in the banking crisis, Gordon Brown found £500 billion to enable money to stop the banks falling apart. And I'm advocating that we're looking at about £100 billion to freeze prices, but for 1 year, and it's £100 billion per year to do that, because at the moment we don't know what Liz Truss is bringing to the party, and we don't know whether it's going to meet the size of the gap. And while we have a price cap that you correctly stated, when we get to the 1st of January, that figure is going to have a 5 in front of it, and it's going to be another couple of £1,000s. And people cannot possibly afford to pay that amount of money for their energy bill.
Sure.
So I'm sorry to disagree with you, but I think you can find the money.
I love having people on the programme who disagree with me even more than I have people who agree with me, because otherwise we're just treading through the same thing. I mean, I hear what you say about freezing the cap over that period of time, and not unlike, although the numbers may be slightly different, to what Scottish and Southern Electric said a few days back. But so it'll sit there, and I'm not going to try and argue the point with you, but I do want to ask you this, because you referred to the fundamental difference between you guys and the people who generate the power. Ofgem, the regulator of your industry, is supposed to keep a weather eye on both of you. Do you sense, as I do, that they're better at keeping a weather eye on you guys, getting the electricity into our homes, the gas into our homes, than they are on the guys who are making billions getting it out of the ground in the first place?
Well, of course, they don't regulate that part of the industry. They regulate the distribution network operators, the people who distribute it, of which there are a number. Companies like UK Power Networks, Northern Power Grid, they're regulated and very tightly regulated, as are the energy suppliers, who are all loss-making and have been for a number of years. So as far as I'm aware, Ofgem has no remit over the companies that are generating electricity or producing oil and gas out of the ground.
Isn't that a glaring, screaming, shouting error? Isn't that what's needed?
It could be. But I think that then takes you towards what your point you're making about nationalisation. I mean, I've been in the energy industry since 1970, and I remember what it was like when the industry was nationalised. Whether there's a regulatory regime that would work, I don't know. I think the area that needs to be looked at quite closely is the market structure in terms of the way electricity is bought and sold. When we have and I know there are plans to look at this now with some urgency, but you have a situation where you're bringing onto the network power that has been effectively subsidised by the renewables obligation, yet they are getting these huge prices in terms of generation because the market price is set by gas. The wind doesn't cost any more, the sun doesn't cost any more, but these schemes are making an awful lot of money. Now, that, to be fair, that's about solutions that were brought in prior to 2017. So there was a change so that renewable projects from 2017 would get the price that they agreed.
Derek, we're going to have to leave it. Make your final point. Finish that sentence, because then we're going to have to move on.
My final point is that I want the government to tell us what's happening, and it needs to be a very, very big number, and we need to know now.
All right, Derek Licorice, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for coming back on GB News again, and have a good day. Tricky one, though, I know it will be. So there we are, real significant food for thought there. The people who get the energy out of the ground should be regulated as well. That's a hole in the argument. And he, like Scottish and Southern Electric, are saying, give us that money for now. We can hold prices down for now. But you, ladies and gentlemen, and I will ultimately have to pay the bill if that's the road the government chooses to go down. What Derek most wants to know is, what road are they going to go down? Coming up, I'll be just digesting the GB News People's Poll with great polling analyst and very good friend of mine, David Cowling. But before that, we're going to take a short break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's exactly 28 minutes past 12 and you're watching The Agenda PM with me, Alastair Stewart. GB News has commissioned some official polling conducted by the group People Polling. Not just a viewers call in, send us what you think via Twitter, a proper poll. We have a sample of 1,235 members of the British public who are, as I say, not exclusive GB News viewers. They're a reflection in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, earning power, and all the rest of it. The GB News People's Poll finds that the majority of Brits would prefer a Labour government with Sir Keir Starmer at the helm rather than a Conservative government with either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak at the helm. Now, all of that comes as Labour currently hold a 14% lead in most of the opinion polls over the Conservative Party. The findings conducted by People Polling also discovered that the word that comes to mind the most about the frontrunner in the Tory leadership, Liz Truss, is untrustworthy. Well, joining me now is polling analyst David Cowling. David and I have worked together over the years for a long, long time and is totally impartial and a very trustworthy voice. Therefore, I can ask you my first question, David. There's a pattern here that's emerging, isn't there?
There certainly is. And, I mean, the poll, in terms of voting intention, gives a very substantial swing to Labour. Labour needs a very big swing to get a small majority in the next Parliament. This poll gives it to them. And some of the ground that you've been exploring throughout the programme, and just specifically now with the poll, suggests that the Conservatives are really languishing with a Labour leader who isn't actually like Tony Blair, but is still giving them a pretty good kicking when it comes to comparing a future with him or with either Truss or with Sunak.
If you look at polls across the piece, which you and I have been doing for longer than I care to remember, you cannot escape the simple truth that there is no burning enthusiasm for Sir Keir Starmer in the country at large, or even, to be brutally honest, within the Labour Party. But there is now a clear acceptance of Labour as a party that could form a viable government, either in its own, as you just said, it's past that crucial point where it might achieve a majority, or if it falls just short of that, with its friends in Scotland and its friends in the Liberal Democrat Party. That's a turning point in British politics.
I believe it is, and it's been a long, hard climb for Labour to get back into that position, and there's no denying it. And I think the only qualifier I would put on that is that the new Conservative leader and Prime Minister will make their own music. They may crash in flames. They may surprise us all. So in a sense, I'm only cautious that yes, I think a corner has been turned for Labour. Whether it is uncontested and they go on, as Labour did after the 92 election, relentlessly forward until by the time we got to the election, everybody expected Labour to win. They could be going down that path. Or we might be finding a much closer struggle with this new Prime Minister, because there are a hell of a lot of people who just dip out of the question, Starmer versus Truss, Starmer versus Sunak. There are very, 40% or so of people saying neither or I won't tell you. Now that's to play for, and it's to play for by both sides.
Absolutely fascinating. And that notion of a honeymoon period going way, way back with all new leaders, even Thatcher in 75, can be very, very tricky. But Truss has said, and other polls suggest that she is most likely to beat Mr. Sunak, that there will be this financial event, which people have joked about. It's not an autumn budget, it's not a budget, but it's a financial event. So to poll now, and I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot here slightly, David, but to poll now until we know what's in that is a bit difficult. But our polling did find that the word most people associate with Liz Truss is untrustworthy.
Yes, I think you're right that we're polling before possible events, but it's right to do so because we now have a yardstick, we have a measure against which we can calculate what the impact, if any, is of the new Conservative leader and Prime Minister. And it's going to be an immense challenge for that person because they're going to say to the British people, we've won 4 times, let's have a 5th. And that hasn't happened since 1832. There's never been a political party that has won 5 times in succession. And if you add into that the incredible headwinds, which you've been rehearsing in previous segments about the energy prices, about the economy and the rest of it, the challenge is enormous. But I say once again, it would be even greater if there was a clear decision on the part of the British public, to hell with the Conservatives, we're buying into Labour. Labour's come a long way, but it's still got a long way to go before it can successfully say, we've broken the barrier, there's no going back, the Conservatives are finished. The only question now is how many seats they have.
David Cowling, always a pleasure and always so thoughtful. Take care. Good to talk to you. Best to both of you. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you very much indeed. David Cowling there, number cruncher par excellence. Coming up, I'll be discussing the race to be the next Prime Minister, Boris Johnson's Ukraine legacy and the latest developments on the Iran nuclear deal. But first, let's give you the very latest news. Here's Rhiannon.
Thank you, Alistair. It's 12:34. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Energy bills will rise by more than 80% from October, with Ofgem announcing the price cap will increase from just under £2,000 to over £3,500. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the government has a plan to help struggling households over the coming months.
The pipeline of cash stretches out throughout the autumn. So there's going to be another £650 coming for every one of the 8 million most vulnerable households in October. In November, another £300 to help every pensioner, £150 extra for everybody who is entitled to disability benefits, on top of what we're doing with universal credit and the living wage, lifting both of those up.
A 36-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. The 9-year-old was shot in her home on Monday night. Earlier, Liverpool legend Ian Rush and ex-Everton player Ian Snowden left flowers near the scene on behalf of the Merseyside football clubs. Police say the suspect, who is from Hayton, was arrested during an operation involving armed officers. And more than 100,000 Royal Mail workers have walked off the job in a dispute over pay. It's the first of 4 days of industrial action, with strikes also taking place on the 31st, as well as next month on the 8th and 9th. The Communication Workers Union is demanding a pay rise that better reflects the current rate of inflation. TV online and DAB radio. DAB Plus radio, I should say. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alistair will be back in just a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Just coming up to 20 to 1, and you're watching the Agenda PM with me, Alastair Stewart. Liz Truss has been accused of a woeful lack of judgment and risking harm to diplomatic relations with France. When asked whether Emmanuel Macron was friend or foe, she responded, "The jury is out." It was at a Tory membership hustings in Norwich on Thursday that she declared she was undecided as to whether her counterpart in Paris was indeed a friend or a foe. Now, a number of issues have affected the United Kingdom and France in recent months, not least including boat crossings in the Channel and, of course, travel chaos at Dover, which Liz Truss blamed four square on the French authorities. Now, joining me now to discuss that and so much more, I'm delighted to say, is Conservative commentator and former advisor to Dave Cameron in Number 10. It is Alex Dean. Alex, it's always a pleasure. I'm going to come to Macron and friend or foe in just a moment, but I don't know if you heard, but I just finished a conversation with the pollster David Cowling, who said the GBNews poll, which is not just our viewers, it's a proper 1,300 sample poll, gives Labour a share of vote that takes them into the possibility of majority government for the first time. What do you make of that?
Hi, Alistair. I didn't work for Cameron in government. I worked for him in opposition. I think that the trouble for the Labour Party is that when you talk about these things in generalities, they are polling much better than they did. When you associate it specifically with the proposition of Keir Starmer, their numbers go down. They are not doing as well with the notion that Starmer is going to be Prime Minister as they are generically as the Labour Party. You, of course, in this point in an electoral cycle, want your leader to be polling really well, better than the Prime Minister. Certainly after this length of time in government, you'd expect the opposition to be doing well in midterm polling. Thatcher always, insisted that the opposition should be miles ahead midterm because it meant the government was doing things, and doing things tends to be unpopular. And the Conservative Party, of course, just removed or is in the process of removing its most successful electoral asset in my lifetime. So you would expect the Labour Party to be well ahead. The trouble for Labour is Keir Starmer just doesn't seem to have stuck well with the electorate yet.
Indeed, a point that David Cowling and I both made. I'm sorry, I thought you did work with Dave in government. I do apologise for that. Entirely my fault there. You would have been brilliant had you done so. Of that I have absolutely no doubt at all. Let's move on then to the woman who a whole set of other polls suggest is the most likely to be our next Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and what she had to say about Macron. The jury is out. Didn't say he was a rotten one or that he's a great one, but that he might be a rotten one. It's clearly a great message for the core vote in the Conservative Party, but everywhere else she's been criticised for being undiplomatic, unprofessional, and a bit cheap.
Well, my instinct is that it's a bit like the conversation we just had about Starmer and Labour. France is a very important ally for the United Kingdom. That is a statement that transcends individuals who are in office. It's more important than who is day to day, month to month in government. The French are an important ally for the United Kingdom and have been for many, many years. President Macron, on the other hand, has said many harsh things about our country and has done some harsh things. He is at the forefront of the attempt to effectively punish Britain for having the temerity to vote to leave the European Union. And plainly, France isn't doing enough, anything near enough, to stop the small boats coming from its own shores. I mean, the French effectively are operating, it seems to me, a pass-through system where they would rather asylum seekers and illegal migrants want to come to the UK and let them rather than dealing with them in France, which is, after all, a safe country. So I can understand why Liz Truss might draw that distinction. The French, of course, as a nation, an important ally for the United Kingdom. Is President Macron a friend of the United Kingdom? Jury's out seems to me, and not an unreasonable response.
That was my feeling as well. And while you were giving that last answer, for folk who are listening to our conversation on radio rather than television, we were running pictures of Monsieur Macron and his wife. I think they were voting in the recent elections. But just to remind people that in terms of the Channel crossings, there is one person who could order the French Navy to stop escorting those boats to the midpoint of the Channel, where they then become our responsibility. And it is Emmanuel Macron, President of the Republic of France.
Yeah, he's made an active decision to effectively continue ferrying asylum seekers and would-be refugees to the United Kingdom. It is an active choice of the Macron regime. And that's why Liz Truss, who after all is our Foreign Secretary on the front line of trying to deal with these things, along with the Home Secretary and so forth, has a pretty good view of the Macron administration and the decisions they have actively made to continue this number of people coming to the United Kingdom. And the number of people now coming in small boats is absolutely unprecedented. I've no doubt the French can do more to try to stop it. And I note from the headlines today that the first discussion now being mooted in the news is the suggestion the French want even more money from the UK to do what anyone would think is probably their job anyway.
Absolutely. Well, there we are. Thank you for that. I want to move it on. Our poll also found that the word that first comes to mind, and sometimes in polling that can be a really useful exercise about Liz, is untrustworthy, I'm afraid. Given the flip-flops on energy prices, any good that she may have done herself over the Macron affair is negated by that. She's changed her mind so many times, and she still won't tell us precisely what she would do if she wins on energy prices. That is not going to play well with Joe and Joanna Public at large.
Well, let's take it stage by stage. I think now, with no disrespect meant to Rishi Sunak, who's run a good campaign, although sometimes a bit more personal than I might have liked, he's going to lose. Liz Truss is going to be our Prime Minister, and that decision is basically already been taken. Most members of the Conservative Party have already voted. You're onto a law of highly diminishing returns now amongst those who are left to vote. So whether people have their minds changed is not that much of a question when most people have already voted. The next issue that you're talking about is the position with the public at large, and that's not going to genuinely be determined, no disrespect to the pollsters, that's not going to be determined until a general election. So the point is that Liz Truss has the opportunity between now in 2022 and when we go to the public in late 2024, possibly even January 2025, that's the latest the government has to go back to the people, to redefine herself in the public space. And I accept that's going to be a challenge. My point would be it would be a challenge for anyone taking over from Boris Johnson mid-term. Boris Johnson won an 80-seat majority. Whoever comes in now will not have been returned by the public at a general election. It's going to be uphill for whoever steps into that. But, they wanted the job. That challenge is going to be for them. And she's got 2 years to redefine herself by doing things in government. I have every confidence she can. Of course, her detractors will say that she can't. But my point is she's got time. You've got 24 months to try to turn that position around. And, a lot of things can happen in 24 months in politics.
Absolutely. Alex, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for finding time for us. Alex Dean there, who used to work for Dave Cameron in opposition, not in government. That was my mistake. I always happily admit to mistakes if I make them. Now, the Prime Minister has also been back in Ukraine this week for the third time since that conflict started. On Wednesday, he was greeted by President Zelensky in Kyiv for Ukraine's Independence Day. The visit comes in the final weeks of the Prime Minister's time in office and has been seen as an opportunity to cement his legacy in standing up to Russia. But is there more to it than that? Joining me now to discuss it and the Prime Minister's legacy on Ukraine is Major General Chip Chapman. First of all, Chip, good to see you. And your military background is also very much an intelligence background as well. So your reaction to Zelensky, first of all, if I might, saying overnight that we were minutes away from a nuclear disaster.
I think that's probably a maximalist phrase used by Zelensky to try and get the international community on his side. There are a number of security pillars which have to be extant in that nuclear power station, of which having functioning electricity going into it at all times is necessary. That was the thing that he was referring to. So I don't think there'd have been a catastrophic radiological leak, but it is another example, really, of sort of Russia's potential deep battle, hybrid way of warfare, of trying to weaponize potentially radiation. And I think that would be a kind of other form of nuclear taboo, which people would not accept in the West, and that would reinforce the perception of Russia as being something absolutely morally beyond the pale and something we must continue to support the Ukrainians against.
Absolutely. Let me pick up something you said at the beginning of that fascinating answer, Chip, and that was Zelensky seeking to shore up support for his position across the West. I mean, in a sense, he was saying thank you to Boris Johnson on Wednesday, but he was also saying goodbye to his greatest upfront ally in that struggle. Do you think Zelensky's worried that after Johnson, that level of support will decline?
Well, all support really relies on three things. It relies on domestic politics, and I think Liz Truss, if she's going to be the PM, still supports it. It relies on alliance politics. So in terms of diplomatic fratricide, Liz Truss's words about Mr. Macron were not that helpful. And it requires the perception of Russia. Now, I think the final speech from Boris Johnson also was one of those things where he does continue to make the case that Ukraine needs support. And that's really important to make sure that people don't turn inward and fail to support them again, because I think this is, and he takes the view that this is a generational struggle. It's morally and ethically the right thing to do. And, he's always quoting Churchill. And one of Churchill's favourite phrases was, of course, is that an appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it will eat him last. And so he's right to keep this front and centre in the minds of the British and Alliance public, as he said those things in Kyiv this week.
On the issue of the jury being out over Macron, what Liz said last night at the hustings, Alex Dean, who is a political operative, unlike yourself, who is a military and a defence one, was saying, well, if you look at what's going on in the Channel and the boat people coming across and those claiming to be refugees, many of whom are patently economic migrants, she may have had a point. In terms of Macron's appetite for talking to and keeping in touch with Putin, might she not have had a point on that front as well, Chip?
Well, there's two ways to look at that. Of course, the first one is that keeping a channel open to your potential enemy is something that's worthwhile doing. And also, both Macron and Scholz, who really been the sort of arch appeasers in lots of people's attitude, did make the point at the G7 conference that we would continue to support Ukraine until victory is achieved. So we have to be slightly careful on that. On the military front, and of course I am a military analyst really, then the relationship between the French and British military is very, very strong at the moment. You have deputy commanders embedded in certain high-level formations. You have an exchange program and an exercise program between the French and the UK, particularly within the airborne forces community. So on a military-to-military level, the liaison and program between the British and French is most excellent.
Chip, it's always a pleasure. Maybe Ben Wallace needs to whisper a few words in Liz Truss's ear before she goes out to play in public again next time. Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Former Major General Chip Chapman there talking about Boris Johnson, Ukraine, and very interesting stuff about Emmanuel Macron as well. Finally, the Iran nuclear deal appears to be back on the table after President Trump ripped up the deal in 2018. Negotiations are currently underway to prevent Iran developing nuclear capabilities, but the door has come ajar again. In recent days, the United States have returned their response to a proposal which the Iranians are now carefully considering in Tehran. The chief of the Israeli intelligence service, Mossad, however, has said that the deal is, and I quote, very bad for Israel. However, there are also concerns that if Iran develops nuclear weapons, it could spark a nuclear arms race across the Middle East. Well, joining me now is the Conservative Member of Parliament, Stephen Crabb, former member of the government, but also in this context, crucially, chair of the Conservative Friends of Israel. Always good to see you, Steve. Thank you for finding time for us. The fear in Israel is palpable. It's political, it's military, and it's Mossad.
You're absolutely right, Alistair. And I had the opportunity to visit Israel earlier in the summer. A real sense of foreboding among some of the senior military figures and political people we spoke to, a sense almost of it's a question of when, not if, Iran acquires a nuclear weapon capability. And I would just say in this context, Alistair, it's not just Israel where there is a sense of fear. Earlier in the year, I went to the Gulf states, speaking to a number of political people in the Gulf. They also share these concerns. Our allies in the Emirates, in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, do not want to see Iran take this final step from being a nuclear threshold power to actually having the capability at its hands with all of the destructive force that we know it would be willing to use.
Yeah, you're describing a potentially enormously potent alliance there. The State Department, Tony Blinken, says that Iran has made important concessions to progress this conversation. Is Israel getting full sight of those alleged concessions?
I'm sure they are. As far as we are concerned, people in my position who sit on the backbenches in Parliament, we are far from seeing all of the details. And there's lots of rumours and briefing and counter-briefing around what may or may not be in the emerging text. What we do know is that for more than a year now, the Iranian regime has been playing a cat and mouse game, been stringing these talks along. And really, at times, you get the sense that they've been laughing at the Western alliance and really not taking their responsibility seriously. Certainly, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, who've got the role of investigating exactly what Iran is getting up to with its nuclear program, he's expressed concern after concern about the posture of the Iranians, the fact that Iran isn't giving him full sight of their infrastructure and what they're getting up to. So there's lots of reasons to be concerned about how this new deal is shaping up, because what we don't want is a repeat of the 2015 deal, which, in my view and the view of many other people, was far too soft. It really did let Iran off the hook. It rewarded Iran to an enormous extent with financial inducements, but crucially didn't really stop Iran's march towards nuclear capability. It did nothing to stop Iran's terrorism activities in the Middle East and all of their human rights abuses that we know that they carry out within the borders of Iran itself.
Final one in 15 seconds, if you can do it. Is the real problem here Biden and his legacy?
It's part of the issue here. The Americans need to be much firmer. And, I was no great fan of Donald Trump, but in terms of international affairs and on the specific issue of Iran, I think that he was proved right, and he'd be proved right again.
Stephen Crabb, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for finding time for us. Have a great weekend. Good to see you. Stephen Crabb there, a Member of Parliament, former Member of the Government as well, but Friends of Israel there. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Alastair Stewart. Up next, a 2-hour special on the money with Liam Halligan and guests. But for now, we're going to leave you with the weather. Have a great afternoon.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. A bank holiday for much of the UK, and most places won't see much rain. It's going to be fine and bright with sunny spells. Some of the coasts, though, could turn quite windy, especially by Monday. The fine weather is being created by an area of high pressure moving in, but it's not with us just yet. This weather front today is bringing a few scattered showers across parts of the West, Wales and southwest Scotland in particular, seeing 1 or 2 heavy showers. The showers fading from Northern Ireland, dry and bright here and across northwest Scotland and for much of the Midlands and eastern parts of England, where we had quite a bit of rain yesterday. It's a much drier and brighter scene here with sunny spells. Still quite warm. It's not as humid as it was earlier in the week, but temperatures getting into